Welcome to the Richmond Public Library's first tutorial on playing Dungeons & Dragons online. I'm James McCann, a digital services tech with the Richmond Public Library, and I'm also an author of middle grade and teen fiction. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since I was 12, and I ran the D&D program for the library starting in 2016. Growing from a single game of 3 players, this program became a smash hit with up to 6 games going at once, sometimes up to 45 players of all ages. This week's topic will be world building. We'll look at an online program called Inkarnate, and I'll show you how to import maps into an online service called Roll20, where you can play Dungeons & Dragons with friends. Introducing our topic this week is Arthur Slade, a popular Canadian author for children and teens who was raised on a ranch in the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan. He is the author of 19 novels for young readers, including The Hunchback Assignments, which won the prestigious TD Canadian Children's Literature Award, and Dust, winner of the Governor General's Award for Children's Literature. He lives in Saskatoon, Canada. He joins us today as a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, Star Wars, and everything fantastical. Thank you very much, Arthur Slade, for coming on to our very first introduction to Dungeons & Dragons. We will be talking about world building today, and we'll be talking to you about how you build worlds for your books. So Arthur Slade is a Dungeons & Dragons fan. He goes as far back as I do in Dungeons & Dragons, and he's familiar with original Dungeons & Dragons. Before that was the system Chainmail.
That's right.
Gary Gygax had developed, and that's what got David Arneson, his partner, interested in creating. He had created Blackmore, which together they put the Chainmail and Blackmore together to create original Dungeons & Dragons. So as much as, of course, we want to talk about your books and your writing as well, you have a copy of the original Dungeons & Dragons behind you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because it's very rare to have that.
It is. Actually, it's actually worth a little bit of money. And not like I could buy a car or anything if I was going to sell it. But yeah, this is the original box. You see, I'm very gingerly that it came in the 3-volume set. And I'll just pull out the first book. This is the original Dungeons & Dragons, Men and Magic. And for me, this really, it's funny, as an author, and I guess as a person and as a fan of things that are fantastical, there's this and Star Wars are the 2 things that changed my life the most, right? And they all happened around the same time. I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in grade 4. And the reason I did is I had a teacher. It was his first year out of university. Dungeons & Dragons had just appeared on the scene. So, and it was people in college who were playing it. And he came, he's teaching grade 4. He's never taught before. And I almost feel like we did Dungeons & Dragons instead of math class, because he actually taught us in grade 4 how to play this game. And it really, my mind was just blown the first time I played it.
Yeah, I think the first time I played Dungeons & Dragons was the red box, the basic Dungeons & Dragons when it came out.
Yeah.
And same thing, that and Star Wars are probably the 2 things that influenced every single other thing that has happened in my life since.
Yeah, being able to play that game, again, I think that led the whole geekery side of my mind realize that, this is okay. This is really a great and exciting thing to do. And I think, I don't want to point too much back to that. I think that's partly what made me become a writer, is just that whole idea of exploring new worlds. And certainly with Dungeons & Dragons, that was so many of the games that we played in grade 4. And I don't play as much now, but I remember playing even in grade 12 when I introduced all my friends, because I went to a different school, to Dungeons & Dragons. They were just amazed by it too. And we can all sit around and talk about the adventures we had as if they were real, which I think that's the really interesting thing to me about Dungeons & Dragons. You can play a game of chess against someone, and you can't go, well, I remember that time I did this move. Maybe if you're really good at it, I don't know. But with Dungeons & Dragons, remember that time we were walking down that alley and that demon came and all these things happened? And, oh yeah, that was horrible. And of course, all those stories, I was always the dungeon master, because of course I wanted to tell the story. And all those stories always end with, and you were such a mean dungeon master, Art. So it just, I didn't bend the rules.
And then you grew up and you started writing books, and of course you're really good to your characters. Nothing ever happens to your characters, of
I
course.
know, I know. I do. I do sometimes make a joke when I talk to students. I talk about how every time I sit down, I think I'm going to write a novel that is going to be a happy story, and everything's going to be great. And then like someone will go out and decide to milk the cow, and they'll go and milk the cow, and it's all turning out perfectly until they get kicked in the head and they die. And it's like, oh yeah, once again, another character. It's really, it helps build those characters. Well, the ones who live, that is.
Yeah. Well, I guess the ones that don't live technically build the other characters.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something to motivate them. That's right. Like don't go near the cows or the or the orcs or anything like that.
Yeah. Good life advice to begin with, anyway. So
That's
I know
right.
when I read Jolted, for anybody who hasn't read it yet, is a story that takes place in Moose Jaw, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly,
Yeah.
and it's about a boy whose family is sort of notorious for always getting struck by lightning,
Yeah.
and he goes to a special school, to sort of learn how to survive this, and it's made me very aware of lightning storms and being outside, and of course new affection for pigs.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's one thing I was trying to do with that story, besides educate everybody about lightning, and
Hmm.
was to get the Disney effect. You got to have a pig in the story, and then like Babe, then it's gonna make millions of dollars. It didn't quite work that way, but I still love the pig.
Well, you don't need millions because you've got the original Dungeons and Dragons book as
That's
well.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, you've got your
but
retirement plan. It's good. It's good.
Dungeons and Dragons to me is much more like being in a novel where it's all happening in your head and it feels a bit more real. Instead of being just a viewer, you're actually experiencing it.
Yeah, and novels have novels are continuing to be really popular right now.
Yes.
People are really enjoying reading, finding new enjoyment. You can only watch so much Netflix.
Yeah, I tried to get to the end of it.
Yeah, I think I make the joke to people that I've watched the internet. I'm done. So I
No,
need something else, and books
that's
are providing that outlet for us. So let's talk a little bit about Dragon Assassin. And
sure.
yeah, I mean, the obvious question is to ask you where your inspiration comes from. So I'm not going to, because that's the big dreaded question. But let's talk about the world of Dragon Assassin, because you did create an entire world for this. You created a map, you created
Yeah,
a new country, you even created the hierarchy of these people learning to ride dragons, and very immersive world. So anybody that loves the Paolini books would adore yours as well. It's a natural. I've done all these Aragon books. What's next? It's yours.
yeah. Well, it's, even though you didn't say where did it come from. You didn't want. That's very kind of you not to ask the question, but in a sense, it really came that with this series, it came from that image of of an assassin riding a black swan, not a dragon. That's because it starts out with them. That's how they train. They train to ride on black swans, and then the next step was, well, what if one rides a dragon instead, and then the whole story kind of unfolds from there. And for me, I really the series that I loved reading when I was younger was Roger Zelazny, Nine Princes in Amber, and they were first person, and they were stories that were told. They were just really fast. Like they aren't long novels, and I love long fantasy novels, but I also love short ones that just like they get to the point. It's like this happened, and they build the world really quickly for you. Instead of giving you 3 or 4 paragraphs, they'll give you just 3 or 4 sentences that suddenly you get it. And it's really this kind of concise world. And so with Dragon Assassin, I have to admit that I didn't sit down and design the world in the way I had with, say, another book of mine, Crimson, where I was writing out the whole history of the world beforehand. Before I even started writing, there's all this kind of extra world building. For me, the world came as I wrote the story. And I think part of that was I just really wanted the story to go fast. I wanted it to be so that when people are writing it, they're immersed in it, and we're all learning it at the same time. And in some ways, when you're reading it, I mean, obviously, I rewrite and more things get kind of put together later on too. but a lot of it was just happening. Oh, I should do this and I should do that. And it just kind of unfolded a bit more, maybe more naturally than some of my other books. Not that they're unnatural, but it really was this way of constructing the world bit by bit so that I understood it and so that the reader would understand it, and trying to make that fantasy world not this thick. I think it's deep in its own way, but I wanted you to feel. The word I'll use is familiar. It's not, the world isn't a copy of any of the other fantasy worlds, but it's still going to feel familiar to you. There are enough things that, I'll use a word that will make you think of the old Norse, myths, just so that you know that there's kind of it's not necessarily our world, but it helps you, believe in this world a bit more if I can reference our world. And so that's kind of what was going on in my head. Is I kind of I kind of really wrote it as I was going. And I think that was the right thing for the story, because when I think about writing it, I think of it as like giving Indiana Jones a sword, and sticking him in the Middle Age and making him a female assassin too, and just making making him run right through the story. And that's kind of the feeling I wanted when people read it. You mentioned map building, the map is part of the world building, and that is a really important point in world building. I because when I was doing Dungeons and Dragons, I used to be like really good at making maps. I'm not so good now. Like I've lost the art of it. But I did, draw up the map, and I drew it up as I was going too, which is really crazy. Like, it's maybe I should make it go this way and that. And then eventually I got it together. But it was the first time where I worked with another author who's also a map maker. His name's Inkarnate, and so it was really interesting to work with someone who's a professional map maker, and for us to actually go back and forth and share ideas about how this world should look. He was reading the books at the same time, so that was
you need some help, or you're just
that was really helpful for me. The world was I would write the book first, then get him to draw the map, because I didn't want him to draw a map and then I go, oh, by the way, there's a whole city you have to draw over here. So I had the world kind of created, and I had my kind of rough map. But afterwards, just talking about it and figuring out where things would go, was just really, it was probably something I learned in Dungeons and Dragons, that it's good to talk to other people, and good to be like, the whole group of adventurers talking about how we're going to get through this next little scenario. That's how we were talking about the map. Like, how do we make it so that it makes sense to people?
Yeah.
It can be really important. I mean, it's important for gaming, right? For Dungeons and Dragons, but also for solidifying the world kind of inside your head. That map, it makes it real for you, the author, the creator, but it also makes it real for the people when they get the book and they flip and they go, there's a map. This is real, and not that, I don't know that readers spend too much time going and looking at the map and going from here to here, but even if when they're done the story, they'll go back and look at it and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's why, when they were crossing this, that's what it looked like, kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you use any kind of programs for creating your maps? Like if you're just going to doodle something, or do you do it by hand, or?
I did it by hand. Yeah. I was looking at some programs, and I just wasn't good enough at them. That it was taking me longer to do anything. That I just, here's my pencil and my paper, and just like the old days, I'll draw it out by hand, and we'll see how it goes from there. That's where Inkarnate was really helpful, is he made it look like an actual map that people could say wasn't just squiggly lines.
But I'm kind of like you, like for my home games, back in the days when we could actually meet in person, I drew everything by hand. And so I actually I discovered that schools can order 1-inch squared graph paper.
Oh,
and so
this is wonderful.
It's wonderful. So I got one of my teacher friends actually to get me a ream of it, and then that became, because it's 1-inch squares, which is Dungeons and Dragons size, and now I've got 100 maps that are waiting for us to be able to use them again. But then when we went online to do everything, we had to figure out, well, how am I going to do maps now? Because everything that I drew, if I take a picture of it, it's not that great. So Inkarnate became,
Yeah, no, that'll be good. And that's the thing, is you never want it to be not fun, the whole creation part of it. And so if you have to learn something, you know, for not that learning is bad, but if it's too much of a hurdle, then it makes it harder to do. And so that's obviously why I abandoned. I forget even which program I was looking at the time, but it's also, that was for me. It's still, I'm going back to basics too. That's how we did it back, you know, in grade 4. I would, you know, get out the graph paper and we would start drawing these little worlds, and so that just felt more natural to me. Plus, I do tend to stare at a screen a lot otherwise, so that was a nice little break.
As a writer, all of your promotion right now has to be on screen. You're writing on screen. You're spending so much time, and even, you know, right now you're talking to me on screen.
Yeah.
So what do you do to, you know, help yourself to not just sit there and eat chips and drink coffee and stare at a screen all day?
Yeah, it's hard. Partly because there isn't anything, well, in this year anyway, there hasn't been really anything you can do other than go outside and go for walks, which is that's a nice little break. And the break from a screen for me these days, and more so now, this will sound odd, I'm getting more into it, is reading an actual book. And it's like, oh, this is a real thing that I'm looking at. And even though I'm still staring at something that's just in front of my face, it's a break from the screen, and it's a different, you know, you're in a different room and you're going to a totally different world. And that's been a good break for me. And it's hard when you stare at screens all the time. Sometimes it is easy to just sit down and watch Netflix because you're kind of almost used to staring at the screen. And so for me, it's actually been a bit of a struggle to get back into just reading. And I'm glad that I decided that I had to read books that I absolutely loved, or that if they didn't get me in the first couple of pages, I'm going to another one, because I really need something to pull me away from everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Although I'd add one more thing to that list that arrived recently, which is we got a puppy. So that's, you know, you can't ignore a puppy, especially when it has to go outside. And that forces you out of your normal routine of staring at your screen.
yeah. And how about I remember you used to use a treadmill desk as well. Do you still do that?
I do. Yes, I still walk probably about 8 kilometers or so a day on the treadmill desk, and um, that's been, I think, over 10 years now.
Wow.
And it's become very much. I actually, for years, I didn't even have a chair in my office. I have one now so that I can sit down and put my shoes on in the morning. But that is, I'm either standing or walking on the treadmill, you know, desk when I'm working. And again, that's something that, uh, as part of me learning that if I don't have something to force me to exercise, I won't exercise. So, and also I keep my room a little bit cooler so that if I'm walking, I feel perfectly toasty. But if I stop, it's like, oh, I'm getting coldy. Oh, I better turn on the treadmill.
Let's talk a little bit about Crimson, because Crimson was
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more involved in creating a world than Dragon Assassin. So did you create the world
Yeah,
beforehand before diving into the writing part of it?
yeah. I I think I had written the first 4 or 5 pages, because you get those, and Crimson is, you know, it's about a girl who actually loses her hand. And I'm not giving away too much because it happens in the first chapter. And then years later, she goes crimson, which is something that means that you're actually becoming magical. So everything, your hair is turning red, and something else grows where her hand used to be. And it's like this. It's not quite a magical hand, but it's, you know, there's something, that part I won't give away too much. But so those are just, that was kind of the basic idea that I had. I want to write this story and about somebody who's become magical in a world where only the queen can use magic. And so because she's become crimson, she's going to be hunted down and killed. And so a lot of the novel is her fleeing all these horrible soldiers chasing her. And I'll hold up this is what Crimson looks like. This is the Canadian cover to the book. And with this one, it's a different pace. Not It's still a pretty fast story in a sense, but when I was writing it, I really wanted to know the world before I got into the story. I wanted to know what the past was, because I knew there was, there one of the past was, the past is like this so much in fantasy that the past always affects the present in a really strong way. And if you think of the Lord of the Rings, right? Like you think about Sauron, all the things he did in the past, like 1,000 years before, are all really affecting right now. Like it's like we could, like it's that it's always kind of weighing on what's going on with people in the fantasy world. And so I needed to figure out the past. I needed to figure out, what happened this 1,000 year. This queen has been ruling for 1,000 years. So what happened before that? And why is she the only one who has magic? And there's this godlike creature who she has defeated back 1,000 years ago, who's just kind of a memory to people, and or really more of a myth. And so I had to know all that before I wrote the story. I couldn't just, unlike what I do with Dragon Assassin, I couldn't just kind of jump in and start going, oh, and then this happened, and this happened. I needed to know everything so that once I got into my, my present part of the story, the present day part of the story, I understood all the past. And that was the really important thing to me, is just to know what that world was. And that, not only did that include writing like a 30-page, I call it an essay, but that would make it sound like I rewrote it several times, but kind of a 30-page outline of the history of that world, and then sitting down and drawing the map, and which, again, that just made that world become more real to me. And it was because the story does move that just a little bit slower and has a bit more, not depth, but a bit more description to what the world is. That's why I needed to know so much about it before I started writing. And the horrible thing about writing and about learning all that stuff is that you put too much in. And I did that the first time. The first version of this book, I had to cut out almost 50,000 words. And that's it was like the novel was 125,000 words, and now it's around 75, 80,000 words. So I was cutting out a lot of the book because I was just spending too much time telling people, and then this mountain was next to this mountain, and you don't want your character, not your characters, you don't want them to fall asleep, but you also don't want your readers to fall asleep.
And that's kind of how Dungeons and Dragons works too, right? Like you really have to create the backstory. You create a backstory for your character. You create, your dungeon master creates the backstory for the world, and then you mesh those backstories together, so that when you all come together to play, just as you say, with Sauron and the Ring, and with your books, or with Crimson, where you're starting off the actual telling of the story, there's tons of pre-writing that has happened before that.
Yeah, that real need to because it's not the real world, right? So you can't just look back in the history book. You have to make it all up and see how that affects all your different characters and the different kind of races and whatever else is going on in that world. You need to understand all of that. And that's, you're right about Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what the really great Dungeons and Dragon games, when I was talking about how they become memories for people, they are the ones that have that kind of richness to them, that it's not, because it doesn't feel like it's just a game, just something that, you're making up in the spur of the moment, because the dungeon master has gone back and has figured out, the history of, let's say, it's taking place in a town, what that town was, who lives there, all those kind of things, like little details that don't necessarily, affect the game, other than to make it seem more real and more fun.
Do you ever have your characters in your books alter the way that you had originally wanted to tell the story?
Yeah. Oh, I think they do. Yeah. They have minds of their own. They get to a certain point. And part of it is that I don't always know the ending when I'm writing something. So I kind of have an idea, and I'm thinking, okay, this is where it's going. And then, at a certain point, one of my characters will go, hey, you know what? You were wrong. You thought your story was going here, but it's going over here because I just did this. And it's like, oh man, how do I fix all this? Or do I have to fix it now? How do I adjust it so that this all makes sense to, I think one of the things as an author, man, maybe as a dungeon master too, is that you have to learn to give up certain things. You have to go, okay, this is where I wanted the characters to go, and I wanted the playing party to go, but they're going over here. Let's make this new story, and perhaps maybe even a better story over here.
Actually, that describes being a dungeon master completely. where you've spent 3 or 4 days or even longer sometimes creating a story for your players, and then your players, who are the characters in the story, decide they're going to go off in a completely different way, and you haven't actually
Yeah.
prepared for that. So now you have to, figure it out and improv it and decide, well, how is this going to make sense? And really, if you haven't done all that pre-writing, like what you were talking about with, figuring out the history and the backstories, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to feel real. And yeah, and you're right. I mean, I've had many occasions where I've sat around with my friends. We've been like, oh, remember that time when we were, in that dungeon and blah, 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 blah happened. And
Yeah. Yeah.
would you say that being an author is kind of like being the dungeon master and the players and just playing a game of D&D
Yeah.
by yourself, basically?
It is, yeah. If only I could like figure out how to roll the dice to get to the end, the end of the book. But yeah, it does feel like that. And I think that the whole dungeon master, the kind of skill set that you have to be a dungeon master and just to play Dungeons and Dragons, both of those things, those kind of that ability to tell a story, to concentrate on the details and yet keep it interesting and exciting for the people who have come to your house to play Dungeons and Dragons or who have come to read your book. Those are the things, that skill set from Dungeons and Dragons really translated well, I think, into becoming a writer.
I'm going to ask you one last question. And then thank you very much for giving us this interview and for introducing our topic of world building today. This is some really fantastic information, I think.
You're absolutely welcome.
Yeah. Well, for people wanting to get into Dungeons and Dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons is storytelling. Whether or not people realize it or not, they're actually writing a book together. And I know my last group lasted 3 years. We told this epic tale that, we could sit down and talk about and, recount the stories. The funny thing about that is that unlike a really well-crafted novel, nobody else understands what we're talking about.
No.
But that's also part of the shared experience and fun of it, I think, too. So if for somebody that wanted to sit down and create this storytelling epic adventure in D&D, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think even though we've been talking about world building and how important it is, I think also to start small, to kind of be. I think that world, if you're kind of getting the idea of the rules and how you're going to do it, starting small makes it easier to make something bigger over time. So I think if you sit back and go, okay, I'm going to build this world and it's going to be gigantic and we're going to have all these games in it, and then you go, oh, how am I ever going to do that? That's going to take too much time. But if you sit back and go, and it's just like when you're writing a novel, you go, okay, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to add this, and then I'm going to add this, and then suddenly you go, hey, you get more momentum, and suddenly the world, that you're creating becomes kind of a real thing. And so that would be my advice: is to just not to think about it so much on the huge scale, but starting small and building it from there.
Welcome to Richmond Public Library's Dungeons & Dragons tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at a program called Inkarnate. Inkarnate is a online program that allows you to make maps. They can look pretty realistic and they are great for gaming. These maps can be imported into programs such as Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, and they can be used for online gaming as well as offline gaming as well. But if most of your gaming is going to be done online, this is a really great way of making maps to use for your games. So before we begin, you do need to have an account to use Inkarnate. To get a free account, you go over to sign in. You can sign up with Facebook or Google, but I'm going to sign in with my email. It just gives me a little bit more control over how much information I'm giving to third-party websites. So you would need to enter in your email, a password twice, make sure that it's the same password. You will get a confirmation email that you will have to respond to, and you also have to make sure that you check the box that says I am 13 years of age or older. So as I said, if you're not 13 years of age or older, please get your parents' permission before using this program. When you sign up, you can go to login, and this is me logged into my account. It's a free account. So you can upgrade to Pro, it does cost money, but I'm going to show you how the free account works, because you might find, especially if you're just starting in gaming, that this is a good way to get started. On this screen, we have several options. We can create a new map. We can load offline backups if we have backups. If you have maps, you will have them here, and you can notice if I hover over them, I can edit the maps. Yours will probably be blank if you haven't started this yet. You do have a search tool so that if you have hundreds of maps, they're easy to find. And you can create folders. So that way, if you have several campaigns going or several games going, you can put all the maps into that one folder. And if you ever need help, they do have a help tool. Sometimes there are alerts that will tell you what's new. You can get your account information, and again, you can get help. So what I'm going to do to show you how this gets started is we are going to create a new map. So as you see, there are several options of what you can do. Depending upon what kind of map you want to make, for the free account, there are different assets and different numbers of assets that you can have depending upon the type of map you're making. We are going to do a fantasy regional HD free map. This has the most assets and is a really great tool for creating a realistic looking world map. So you're going to click on choose style. So here you have your resolution for how clear your map looks. Don't go for the highest possible, go for 1K. The reason you want to do 1K is because when you import these into a program like Roll20, if they're too big, then they will take forever to load, and then you're waiting a long time for your maps to load. I like doing landscape. It's the only option that's available in the free version, so that works. Great map. Depending upon your internet connection and your computer's speed, this can either be quick or this might take a little while. So here we go. We have a blank canvas, which is what this is here. We have a toolbar up at the top, and we have a toolbar on the side. So I'm going to show you how the tools work as we go. I don't use every single tool. There's lots of things that you can do with this. I encourage you to explore once you start creating maps, but I'm going to show you the very basics because the simpler you keep it, the more fun the game is. What I will say is down at the bottom you have save changes. You want to do this every so often just in case your computer system goes down, you lose internet. You don't want to wind up losing all of your work, especially if you've put a lot of work into a map. So I'm even going to do that right now. I'm going to click on save, and I'm just going to call this my first D&D map. And it doesn't take long to save because there's not really anything here. So the select tool is a great tool for when you want to choose different things. If I press the space bar, you'll notice I get the hand, and now if I click my left mouse button, I can pan everything around. If I don't click the space bar and I just click the left mouse button, then I can select things. So this is for sort of your mass select. What I'm going to use first is the brush tool. So what I want to do is I want to make this look a little bit more like ocean. So when I click on brush tool, I get the catalog. And the catalog is going to have a whole bunch of different options that I can have. But again, because I have the free version, not all of these are available to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click only free textures. There's all the ones that are available to me. I look for something that looks a little bit watery. Water blue, that works for me. Water blue 2, I think that's what's actually on there right now. But just to show you, I'm going to take water blue 2. Now, this is going to come into the foreground. And what I want is it to come on the background, because this is, I want my mountains and my land and everything to be over top of this, and you'll find out a little bit later why that is. So this is going to take a long time to color in if I use a circle that small. So up at the top I have an option for resizing this. So again, click left mouse button, make that circle, I can go as big as I can, And now when I click on the left mouse button, I can color this in. Let's click spacebar, left mouse button, and just make sure that you get all the sides here. Now that you have the water done, you want to create some land, so that I'm going to actually create an island, which will make this a pretty good map for Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to open the catalog again, and I'm going to look for something that looks like land. And actually I'm going to go for this one here, land brown 1. Perfect. I don't actually going to leave the circle this big for now. Hold down the left mouse button, and then I'm going to drag it. I'm going to go a little bit slower than I did for the water because I don't want it to get everything. There we go. Perfect. So now I have land, I have water, and I'm going to close the brush tool, and I'm going to use the next one, which is the stamp tool. Stamp tool is what gives you all of your icons. So this gives you things like the mountains, opens up this menu over here. So you'll notice it defaulted to mountains. There are 4 different styles of mountains, and if I have random stamps checked, then it will, every time I put down a mountain, it's going to go through them. But if I don't have that checked, then whatever is on this screen is what I'm going to be using always. So I like having random stamps checked. But I'm going to open the catalog just so you can get an idea of what is here. Again, I want to click on only free stamps, because that's really all I want to see. And this shows me my options. So I do have small mountains and I have large mountains. I'm going to go for small. And then if I hold down the mouse button, I can drag and it'll just keep on putting them in. Or I can click the mouse button one at a time for a little bit more control. I'm going to put mountains over there like that, and then maybe some mountains over here like that. And I can go back to the catalog, see what else we have. Besides mountains, I probably want to have some trees, so I'm going to grab trees here. And then, if you remember, I had put the water on the background. These are actually being printed on the foreground. So that way, if I ever needed to switch it up, then I could. And if you notice, the trees look really, really big, actually. If I don't like something, I can always go Control Z to reverse it, or I can use the undo up here. So Control Z. I'm just going to get rid of all the trees. And there we go. So if I want to make them smaller, what I do is I go up to the size, hold down the mouse button, the left mouse button, make them smaller. I can see how they are. There we go. That's kind of perfect. And then if I want to have some trees inside the mountains, I can. And it places them pretty realistic looking. So there we go. And then I'm going to maybe make a forest over here. There. And a bit of a forest just like that, and I'll show you why I'm going to leave that blank inside of there. So something else that I might want to do is put in some rivers. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the brush tool, open the catalog, and I'm going to keep it the same color of water as I used up here, but I don't want a brush that big. So I'm going to make this much, much smaller. There we go. And now, if I hold down the left mouse button, I can draw a river through my world, and it looks pretty good. And the other thing I can do is I can even make, I'm gonna do this here, I can even make lakes. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to put a lake in here, maybe a lake down here, and yeah, that's good. So far it's looking like a pretty decent map. But of course, I also want to have some cities, some villages, so I'm going to look through my icons again. I'm going to go for a fortress, and I'm going to put over here. Again, I don't want it to be that big, so I resize it. And then, rather than holding down the mouse button and dragging it, because I don't want a whole bunch of these, I'm just going to click it once, and there we go. Open up the catalog.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go for an orc village right there.
Yeah, I've already talked to him.
Perfect size. Open the catalog again. And just a regular village, and I'm going to put that here, but I don't want it to be that big. That's a huge village. There we go. It's a better size. Click it there. There we go. So I've got a fortress. I've got a couple of villages. If I want to put in roads, I can do that as well. And again, I would use the brush tool. Open the catalog. Find something that looks like a road. Let's go for, actually, graves. I think good. I'm going to go for that one. I'm going to make that brush really small. There we go. And then I'm just going to make a road up to there. They've maybe got a road over to here. So something else I can do for the icons is if I wanted to put in a bridge there, but I want a little bit more control, if you use your scroll wheel, or if you're using a trackpad, then your two fingers, you can zoom in and out of your map. And then that gives you a little bit more control. I can go back to Stamp Tool, open my catalog, get a bridge. Number 3 is the one that's going to work here. And obviously I need it to be way bigger than that. Okay. So once you place it, you can actually resize it with these corners here. You can also resize it up here. So it gives you a little bit of option. And then you can also move it. So to move it, you just use the left mouse button, hold it down when you have those 4 arrows. You can also rotate it if you want. And there we go. Then I'm going to zoom back out. So now I have a bridge. So my map looks pretty good, but I want to have a little bit more texture. So I'm going to go back to my brush tool and click on the Open Catalog. And I'm going to click on Grass. And if you remember, I had mentioned that you should save it every once in a while, so I'm going to click on Save. And now, I want a little bit bigger of a brush, but not too big because I do want to have some control. And I'm just going to use this like this, just to give it a little bit of more texture. There we go. I'm actually going to make my island just a little bit bigger here.
Yeah, I'll go in a minute.
So perfect. Now we have a really good map that we can use.
So there's
for
anybody
Dungeons
going after me,
Dragons. If I wanted to, I could actually add a grid to this with this tool down here, which is the grid tool. So I can show grid, and there you go. But I prefer to do that in Roll20, because otherwise you're trying to match up the grids in Roll20 to the grid on your map, and it's actually a lot harder. So I don't use the grid tool. What I am going to do now is just decorate a little bit, and you can decorate yours how you would like yours to look. And maybe you want to add some text. So if you click on text, you can click it where you want the text to be. So I'm going to have my text on here. I'm going to move that to there. Opens up a menu on the right hand side so that you can change the color of the text and even the font and what it looks like. That's kind of perfect to me. So my text is going to say D&D map. There we go. I think accidentally I put in 2. So if that happens, you can always just delete the other one. Click on the select tool so that I can select the one that I added by accident. Click on delete. And there we are. We have D&D map. So there's my map. This is how Inkarnate works. As I said, it's a really great program for exporting maps into Roll20. So what I want to do if I want to do that is first I'm going to save it just to make sure I don't lose it. Go to your menu, which is the 3 lines up at the top left hand side. You will see export as image. Click on there and you will get this screen. So save your image, continue editing. Unless you want to share it on Reddit or something like that, you can. Now it has been exported as a image file. I will show you in the next tutorial how to set up a campaign in Roll20 using maps that you've created in Inkarnate, and I will also show you how to get other maps as well that you can use, but that is the tutorial. Hello and welcome to Richmond Public Library's tutorial on using Roll20 for playing Dungeons & Dragons online. While there are many options available, I'll be showing you Roll20 mainly because it's free. There is a paid version, but if you're just starting out in Dungeons & Dragons, then the free version may just be exactly what you need. The thing to keep in mind with the free version and the paid version is not only do you have fewer options, but you also have ads in the free version. The first thing you'll want to do is to create an account. So to do that, you're going to go to roll20.net and you're going to click on create an account. They will ask you for an email, password. You will receive an email, and after you respond to that, you will be able to log in. And then to log in, you just put in your email address, password, click sign in. I have already signed into my account. This is my library account. And in this, I'm going to show you how to set up a very basic game. I'm going to use as few tools as possible, actually, to keep the gameplay as simple as possible. We will import the map that we created in the previous tutorial during Inkarnate, and I will show you how to find tokens, how to move them around, and some basic setup. So the first thing I want to do is create a new game. You're going to want to give your game a name. So mine is going to be called RPL First D&D Game. It is possible to make your D&D game accessible to the public in case you're looking for players. You can do that with Roll20. If you're going to do that, you'd want to use tags so that people can find it. I'm not going to. So before I click I'm ready to create game, you're going to want to go down where it says optional, choose a character sheet. Click on there, and the one that I usually use is I use 5e by Roll20, and it's a nice simple character sheet. We will look at characters in the next episode. And that's what the character sheet is going to look like, and I can click I'm ready, create game. Now if I want to choose a file to put a special graphic in here, I can for my players to see when they're launching the game. I'll show you how to invite players to it in our final episode. What I want to do before I start working on the game itself is I click Game Add-ons, and I'm going to do Pathfinder Playtest Flip Mat Multi-Pack. Try saying that 5 times fast. And there we go, add to game, and just double check, and you can say game add-ons includes the custom decks, maps, adventures, and more into your game. That's going to give you some options for some more maps. So what I'm going to do now is click launch game, And here we are now in Roll20. What I will tell you is that I find it easier to use Roll20 with a mouse than I do with a trackpad. You might find it easier with the trackpad, but I just find that the mouse gives me way more control because Roll20 tends to be very, very sensitive. You're going to want to allow it to have access to your webcam and to your microphone if you're going to be playing it online with Roll20 as your video source. So I'm going to click allow. You can see me down here on the lower left hand side. There I am. I'm going to make a change here though. So over on the right hand side we have some options. We have chat, art library, journal, compendium, jukebox, collection, and my settings. I'm going to click on my settings. And the first thing I'm going to do is scroll down almost to the bottom actually where it says I want to broadcast to others. I don't usually do video. I'm going to click nothing right now actually. And what I'm going to broadcast to other is nothing. Then click reconnect. And suddenly I disappear. So the reason I'm going to have that is because without the video and the audio, it's going to be a little bit more responsive when I'm inputting things, and I don't need to watch myself as I'm doing that. The other thing that I want to change, actually I'll start at the top and I'll show you from top down. So I'm going to change my display name to who I am. So I am the Dungeon Master. I usually get my players to put in their character name rather than their player name, or their player name / and their character name. It helps me to remember everybody's characters' names. Save name. And then if you're going to use the online dice, I usually enable 3D dice. I don't click automatically roll 3D dice, but you can always play around with these and just see which ones you prefer. And now the next thing that I do is player video avatar size. I'm going to go to names only. Movable avatar video screens, player controlled, so that they can look around the portions of the map that you make visible to them. And everything else I just leave as is. So reconnect. And we will look at everything else. So your chat is where you and your players can communicate if you don't have any audio or video. You can go down into the chat bar and it works just like texting each other basically. What I like about this is even if you are using audio and video to communicate, you can actually as a dungeon master decide to send something as a whisper to another character. So that means that only that character gets that information. So if you want to send secret information to someone, you can. And the information for that is right where it says Roll20 chat tips for rolling dice. If you want to do the you can roll the dice by using the full commands, or there's an easier way to do it, which I will show you. The whisper is kind of fun because you can go /W player's name and then whatever you want to whisper. So I don't have any players on here, so there's not really a place for doing that. In the middle here, where you see the boxes, that's my play area. So this is my battle map. This is where all the action takes place. I can scroll in and out with the scroll wheel, or I can use actually the scroll wheel goes up and down, not in and out. So a zoom control, so I can go in and out for my map. If I hold down the right mouse button, I get the hand and I can make it go up and down, or I can make it go left and right if there was anything on the left or right. This map appears to be in portrait mode. If I click on the page toolbar, this will bring down all of my different maps. So these are my scenarios. So you will see that there are some maps on here already. That is from the Pathfinder plate kit that we added on, and so you get to have some really cool maps. Whatever map you were using, if you want your players to have access to it to see it, they will only see whatever map has this little red ribbon. So if you hold the left mouse button down on it and you move it, you can move the player's view from map to map. So we are going to begin on start. On the left-hand side, we have some more menu options. Ones that we're going to look at today. There's select what level you're on. So if you watch the Inkarnate video and you had foreground and background for graphics, this is kind of the same thing, where you have map and background. We're going to click on that because we're going to work on the map. When you're playing, the tokens that represent your characters, or the pictures, then you would have objects and tokens. If you want things on the map that only you see as the dungeon master until the players, say, go around a corner or something, then you can put it on the GM info overlay. And GM stands for Game Master. You can also use this tool to zoom in and out. And then there's a few other tools that I'll show you. This one I'll show you right now, which is the dice tool. So if you click on it, you have all these options for dice. If I want to roll a d20, I can roll 1d20. I know my character has a +5 to hit, so I'm going to add in 5. And then when I click roll, you can see the dice. So I got a 7. It also tells you in the chat what I got, because I got 7 + 5, which is 12. So as a DM, I like to use the dice because it just makes sure that everybody knows I'm rolling fairly. I'm going to click the screen anywhere, take away the dice. For my players, some of them prefer rolling actual dice, and I go by the honor system. We're all playing a game. Nobody in my group cheats. So I let them use regular dice if they want to use regular dice. If suddenly all they get is natural 20s the entire game, that might change my mind, but nobody's ever done that. So what we're going to do first is set up the battle map to bring in that map from Inkarnate. So we're going to click on Page Toolbar, have it on Start, and I'm going to click on Page Settings, which brings this up. So this tells me the width and height, which is 25 pixels by 25 pixels. And the background, the scale, everything is 5 feet. We're going to be importing in a world map, so it actually, say, might be 20 feet for every square. The grid is, I like using squares. You can use hexagons if you want, but I like squares. Measurement is D&D 5e compatible. And the other thing that you might want is under legacy lighting. You can use Fog of War, but I don't use Fog of War. It is kind of cool if you want characters to only see what, you know, if they can see 120 feet in the dark, then Fog of War will adjust for that. But for me, it's getting a little bit too complicated into the program itself. I prefer just to describe things and play a little bit of theater of the mind. So I'm going to click Save Settings, click on the X to close that, and here's my map, and I'm going to import. So to import that map from Inkarnate, I'm going to go to the Art Library, and here, if you can purchase assets, so tokens that represent different things, or you can upload them yourself. There are free assets, so I'm going to click on the plus. And depending upon what you're looking for, I'm going to click on characters, and you can often find something that'll work for you in terms of what you're doing if you're doing a pretty basic game. But like I said, you can also upload different things. So I'm going to go to My Library, which will allow me to upload. Click on Upload, and you can either drop the file in, or you can click on Choose a File. Now you want to wait for it to say Upload Complete, which it has. I'm going to close this. Over in the assets under recent uploads, we see my first D&D map, which was what I made in Inkarnate. I'm going to place it on the map. And you can see it's super tiny, which isn't very helpful. It's only like 2 squares by 3 squares. So if I bring my mouse arrow to one of the corners, or even the sides, but I'm going to go to the corner, and then I can make it bigger. And then I can check this out and just sort of adjust it from here too. Because I can see, remember I said that this was 20 feet. So if a character can go 30 feet per turn, then I can go one round, or 1 square. So we have 1, 2, so that's 40 feet between the shore and the mountains. Do I want that to be more? If I want that to be bigger, what I can do is go back to my page toolbar, go back to my map, click on page settings,
Hi
and
there.
then I'm going to make the
Printing?
height
Sure.
a little bit smaller.
Okay.
So before I do that,
Yeah.
I'm going to actually count it. I'm going to
Yeah,
see
I'll
'cause
print it for
we have
you.
25 down. So I'm going to have
Give me
1,
1
2,
second here.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So then I'm going to go back to here. And for height, I'm actually just going to
6
say
pages?
20, just to be on the safe side. And width, I'm
Doesn't
going
sound
to
right.
double that to 50. And now, there. Because now when I make
It'll just
this
take a minute.
fit lengthwise, it is actually going to increase size downwards. So what I need to do is where I miscalculated. My height I'm going to make 40. Save settings. And there we go. Now for the shore we have 2, 4, 6, 80 feet instead of 40 feet. So it's about double the size in terms of how large it is. If I want to see the full map, I can just zoom out. And like I said, Roll20 tends to be
There you are.
really sensitive.
You're welcome.
So there
Have
we
a
go.
good day.
There's my map. And and this is on the map layer. So if I want to populate this with with things that they're going to battle, what I might do is, and to be honest, I would probably I won't now, but I would probably even make this a little bit larger. Once you have your map set up the way that you like, it's time to populate it with some monsters. So I know that I have an orc village. So let's go to the orc village. I'm just going to zoom in. And when the characters get to that, maybe hidden in the trees here, there's some orc warriors. So you can just place the orc warrior token by left clicking on it, dragging it over and putting it where you want it. Or we can go to the compendium, and the compendium has a lot of really great information allowed under the gaming license. So I'm going to type in orc and it will search. Click on orc and it will bring up everything that you need for playing the orc. Just so you don't have to remember all of this or write it down or print it out, you can left click on it, drag it over, and then just put it on the map where you want it. So here you want to make sure that you are in GM info and overlay, so that when you try to move your tokens around, you're not moving around the map by accident. And all I have to do is left click on the orc, bring it over, place him where I want him to be, and there he is. If I double click on him, it brings up information about the orc. Usually what I like to do here is, if you go to the journal is a place where you can show things to players, but you can keep a lot of information for yourself. So you'll see that I have orc, which is now my NPC. If I double click on it, it gives me all of this information. What I'm going to do is click on edit, and here is my information on it. I'm not going to give this to any of the players. This can only be edited and controlled by myself, the Dungeon Master. I do want to give a token for this character, so now I'm going to go to the art library, find my arc there. That's perfect, the first one there. And I can resize this window to sort of get out of the way a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to bring him down, and I'm going to click on there. I'm going to click Use Selected Token. There we go. So now that's using this token. I'm going to actually delete this now. And now when I click Save Changes, oh, I don't want to. Now when I click Save Changes, I have all this information. I can double click on this orc. I can check them out at my NPCs. And I know exactly how they're going to work. So which is under character sheet. So there's how they work. So now if I wanted to have, say, 7 of these orcs, I don't have to keep on doing that. I can just click on them, hit Control C for copy, and then Control V, and I just make a bunch of copies. And oh, there we go. We have a whole bunch of orcs waiting, and the players won't be able to see those because they're on the GM level. So if I want the players to see them because suddenly they're, say, over here, then all I would have to do is click on the orc, right click, layer, and then go to token layer, and they're going to see it. And to move them around, all I have to do is click on it, click the arrow keys, and I can move them. So remember, one box is 20, so if they can go 30 feet, I can go 20 and a little bit. So I would probably round it down to just that you can go 1 box, and that's your movement. So now I'm going to scroll out, move that over a little bit. And that's basically how you get set up into a really basic Roll20 game for playing Dungeons and Dragons. This is enough to bring in your maps, get it populated with some creatures. How you set up characters and how you use things like the journal I'm going to go into in the next tutorial. What I would suggest is just for now practice bringing tokens from the map layer to the token layer, to the GM layer. Practice using the dice. Give that a few rolls. Next time we'll learn a little bit more. Thank you very much for tuning in to Richmond Public Library's beginning
do
to
it
use
all at once,
Roll20,
and then come to me when they're
see you
finished.
on the next tutorial.